What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix. I'm Ryan Coop here with your Week 3 CFL Fantasy recap for the 2021 season. Before we get into taking a look at the results from week number 3, just a quick note on week 4. The Thursday night game between the Edmonton Elks and the Toronto Argonauts has officially been postponed due to a COVID outbreak within the Elks organization. Looks like it won't be played this week. Maybe they push it back to, early next week, but at this point, that's looking pretty doubtful as well. So, quick note, no Elks and Argos on Thursday night. So first game of the week kicks off Friday, meaning my typical schedule is going to be pushed back about a day. So on Wednesday, you can look forward to the week 4 quarterback and running back previews. Thursday, I'll have the wide receivers and the defenses, and then the depth chart update on Friday. So look forward to those as well. But let's take a look back to week number 3 of CFL Fantasy. It was a week where some guys we expect to be at the top of the charts got back, but had slow starts to the season, got things back on track. It was a week where guys with great starts to the season fell back to earth a little bit, and there were a fair share of surprises in between. Without further ado, let's get into taking a look at the quarterbacks in week number 3. Once again, as he's done throughout the first 3 weeks of the season, Cody Fajardo, one of the quarterbacks leading the way, puts up 23.5 points against the Red Blacks. Toronto starter Nick Arbuckle getting his first start of the season. 23 points against the Bombers. A great day for Arbuckle. Adams Jr. putting up 22.9. He rounds out the top 3 guys at quarterback above 20 points. A bit of an off day completion percentage-wise, under 50% for Adams Jr., but a big day picking up over 60 yards on the ground helps pad those fantasy stats nicely, and was still worth the pick when it came to your fantasy lineup. And it really dropped off from there. We had Trevor Harris at 14.7. That seems to be kind of the range we're expecting, a 10 to 15 point week from Trevor Harris so far, because he's not putting the touchdowns on the board. An off week for Collaros and the Bombers offense, just 14.6 points. He does still pick up, a couple big plays, a couple touchdowns. So that's not a terrible fantasy performance for you there. And then the big surprise of the week, Jake Mayer out in Calgary. All week long in practice, we thought Michael O'Connor would be getting the start in place of Bo Levi Mitchell. But Mayer came in, threw a 300-yard passing game, threw a touchdown pass, did have a couple early interceptions, but not a bad debut. And if you were one of the few people who took a chance at $5,000 on Jake Mayer, well, you got a pretty decent return, giving the rest of the performances at the quarterback position. Michael Riley slated as the starter for the week and ends as the starter of the week. Yes, finally, the first person listed on the depth chart for the BC Lions actually started the game, but a bit of a struggle for him against that Elks defense, just 12.5 points. And then Matt Nichols, once again, that Ottawa offense just gets nothing going this year. A dismal 5.1 points if you decided to put Matt Nichols in your lineup. Taking a look at the running backs, a couple surprises near the top of the charts here. Kadeem Carey, 22.1 points, picks up the double touchdown day. If you go back to last week, I had talked about how Calgary's running backs so typically split the time. Ante Milanovic Leader got some plays in there. So they were both, averaging less than 10 points fantasy-wise a game, but those touchdowns really helped you if you took a chance on Kadeem Carey. Puts up 22.1 points. James Wilder Jr. ran the ball down the throat of the BC Lions, picks up a nice 20-point day himself. I believe his second game of the year now, over 20 points. And then the biggest surprise, backup running back for the Toronto Argonauts, DJ Foster, did not play the first 2 games of the season. He comes in for game 3 in place of AJ Ouellette. And huge 100-yard rushing day. I believe he averaged almost 10 yards a carry, 19.4 points. He picks up a touchdown as well. A huge day for DJ Foster that I'm guessing not very many people put him in their lineups. If you were expecting John White to have another big day, that didn't work out for you. Just 4.5 for him. So it was all Foster for the most part, even though the carries were split pretty evenly. And then rounding out again, much like the quarterbacks, there's a couple guys at the top that if you pick them, you hit the nail on the head. And other than that, you were looking at a bit of a disappointing performance. William Stanback puts up 14.2 for the Alouettes. Another consistent effort, much like the week before from Stanback. Getting into the middle of the range, William Powell at 8.7, 10 carries, 20 yards, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, against the Ottawa Red Blacks. Definitely expected more from William Powell this week, and you did not get your money's worth if you paid for one of the highest paid running backs in the game. Shaq Cooper gets his big first start for the Lions. You know I was high on Shaq Cooper. I've been hyping him up for weeks. And this, to me, was a disappointing effort. Just 3.5 points, 35 rushing yards. 20 of them came on one play later in the game. Not the debut for Shaq Cooper I was certainly expecting. In fact, Chris Rainey, actually, the backup running back / kick returner, getting even more points than him on the board with 5.8. Timothy Flanders still has not broke out yet for a struggling Ottawa offense, just 4.7. Brady Oliveira, a second straight down week for him at just 4.6 after a huge debut against the Ticats in week number 1. The Bombers just didn't really rush the ball, and when they did, they didn't do it effectively. I thought the play calling was a little bit off against the Argos in the rematch this weekend, and Oliveira just did not get the carries and did not get the yardage when he did. So an off day for him as well. Rounds out the notable fantasy performances at running back for week number 3. Taking a look at the wide receivers, once again, a couple surprises at the top of the charts. Davaris Daniels, 24.8 points before leaving the game due to injury even. Imagine what he could have done if he played the whole game. I believe early second half is when he left. Huge day for him, over 100 yards. He picks up a touchdown. This is a guy that, I've warned the past couple of weeks to stay away from, because more often than not, he's not putting you up those points that you need. But he can break out for a game here and there, and boy did he do that this time. 24.8 points against the Bombers defense. Big bounce back day for Greg Ellingson after putting up just 1.1 points the week before. Gets himself a lot of targets, a lot of catches, and a lot of yards against the Lions. 23.8 points. You love to see Greg Ellingson getting back on track. Josh Huff, huge day for him. 85-yard catch helped get him basically half his point total. A 17.8 day for him. Markeith Amble's also putting up 16.3. So a couple Calgary receivers with some big days there at the top of the charts. Jake Weineke looking like perhaps maybe the go-to guy for the Alouettes through 2 games. He's got 2 touchdowns, 2 big games. He is definitely looking like a promising fantasy option as a leader amongst that Alouettes receiving core. And then moving down the charts, we've got 2 Ottawa receivers surprisingly at the top of the list, especially given that, Matt Nichols only put up a 5.2 point performance. RJ Harris has the big day at wide receiver. We expect him to be the number 1 go-to guy for Nichols and that Red Blacks offense all season long. And this is the kind of performances you'll get from him if he is. And so a solid day for him. And Devontae Dedmon, the return guy for the Red Blacks, gets a rare rushing play that leads to a touchdown that helps get him up to 14.9 points there as well. Kyron Moore, always reliable, puts up 14. Darvin Adams in his big day, or his season debut, puts up a nice 13.7, a big 50-yard touchdown catch for Adams. Another touchdown in back-to-back weeks for Rashid Bailey. at 12.9. Quan Bray picks up a touchdown. And then as we get to the middle of the pack here, solid days from Eric Rogers, Eugene Lewis. Mike Jones, a bit cheaper on the salary, seems to actually, surprisingly, despite all of those options for Edmonton, be a go-to receiver so far this season. So maybe that's a good, save a little dollar play you could do going forward. Of course, with the whole Elks COVID situation, we don't know how that will affect things when they'll play next and who's all healthy. So, take that for what it's worth. Kenny Lawler falling back to earth a little bit after 2 straight weeks, hovering close to that or over that 20-point range. Just 11.1 points for him. Bit of a surprise in Kyan Schaffer-Baker coming in for the Riders, puts up 10.4 points. They've got some injuries in that receiving core, and this could be an interesting guy to watch if he gets a start in Week 5 when they come back from the bye week. And then rounding out the top receivers here, Ricky Collins Jr. putting up 10.2 for the Argos, and value pick Braden Lenius picking up 9.7 for the Riders. Getting into the middle of the pack here, Lamar Durant, 9.3. Paul McRoberts Jr. getting the start in place of Saskatchewan's Shaq Evans out on the injured list. He puts up 9.1. So does BJ Cunningham. Notable guys, having a bit of a down week here in this middle of the pack. Lucky Whitehead, just 7.4 after 2 big weeks to start the season. Kamar Jordan really didn't get the ball much for Calgary. You would expect maybe Jake Mayer to target him specifically in week number 3, his first start. You go to the veteran receiver, but he does get the 1 touchdown. But other than that, not much production from Kamar Jordan. Darrell Walker, Brian Burnham, 2 other big names that you expect to be the go-to receivers for their teams that did just not happen this week. Greg Ellingson got all the targets for the Elks, meaning Walker did not get so much going his way, and a struggling offensive performance by Riley and the Lions offense leads to a disappointing day for Burnham, much like it did for Lucky Whitehead. Another guy that, had a bit of a down week, Daniel Braverman, I thought was a bright young piece of that Argos offense this season. 5 catches week 1, 8 catches week 2, also featured in the return game. No catches his way in week number 3. So if you were like me and you started him in your lineup thinking he'd get those return yards and those receiving yards, the receiving yards just did not come for you. And finally, to round it out, looking at the bottom of the list here, Jordan Williams-Lambert, just 2.8 points. Again, he left the game due to injury, and who knows how long he will be out for. Herji Mayala, such a promising receiver last season for Calgary, just has not gotten the fantasy performances I expected out of him so far this season. 1.7 points for him. And once again, Dominic Grimes, 1,000-yard receiver for Ottawa in 2019, does not get the targets I thought he would this year out in BC. Just one catch for 1 yard for Dominic Grimes as he finds himself near the bottom of the list at wide receiver for a few weeks in a row now. And finally, looking at the defenses, Winnipeg's defense putting up one of the top point totals again this week. They did get to quarterback Nick Arbuckle a couple of times. They did force a fumble and score a touchdown. Jesse Briggs with the nice fumble recovery touchdown there. Puts up 13 points for the Bombers. Saskatchewan's defense continues to be a force to be reckoned with. 12 points for them, 6 sacks, and a couple turnovers for that Riders defense. Very fine day for them. 2 straight weeks with 6 sacks, I should add. And then getting into kind of the middle of the pack, Montreal puts up 6 points on defense, a couple interceptions of Jake Mayer. Edmonton picks up 6 points as well. Calgary with 4, Toronto with 3, BC with 2, and Ottawa not being able to replicate that week 1 performance against Edmonton where they put up 18 or 19 points. 0 points against the Riders, the Red Blacks, not being able to get to Cody Fajardo or force any turnovers there. So those were the overall results for week number 3. As I mentioned, there were some ups, there were some downs. How did I do with my lineup? Well, this is the lineup I ended up going with for 68.6 points. Vernon Adams Jr. carrying the bulk of that with 22.9. That's around what I expected to see from him. Shaq Cooper, 3.5 points. Disappointing effort, you know. I had James Wilder Jr. in my lineup. I was going back and forth between him and Cooper right up until the game started on Thursday, and I thought Cooper was going to have the better day. I thought BC was going to be winning that game and leading and running the ball in the fourth quarter, and turned out to be the opposite. So a big miss there for me, unfortunately. 16.5 point difference to be exact. That could have, you know, changed the whole fantasy week around, but William Stanback, not a bad day, 14.2. As I mentioned, disappointing days for Daniel Braverman, Lucky Whitehead. A solid performance again for a $2,500 pick in Braden Lenius. And an average day, I would say, from the Alouettes defense. You know, 6 points, I would say, is around that average range for a defense. It's not spectacular, but teams often put those up. So that's how I did in week number 3. That's how all the players did in week number 3. Again, stay tuned for week 4's videos coming out in the next couple of days. Next one up, I'll take a look at the quarterbacks for week 4. And this should be an interesting week of CFL Fantasy. Assuming, you know, that the Thursday night game that's been postponed will not be part of this week. There's only 6 teams to choose from, so the options are more limited. I was high on a lot of the options in that Edmonton and Toronto game, so that changes things a little bit. But we'll talk through the quarterbacks next episode, and then we'll look at running backs, wide receivers, defense, depth chart updates later in the week as well. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, do all the YouTube things, subscribe, like, comment to let me know. Let me know if you have any fantasy questions, any fantasy thoughts. On CFL Fantasy. You can tweet them at me as well, at CooperTrooper42. Later in the week, I'll go and I'll tweet out, you know, lineup things of note from the depth charts, the injury reports as well, if I don't cover them in videos throughout the week. So make sure you stay tuned, check that all out as well. And if you want to get more CFL content, check out my weekly podcast, the Canadian Football Countdown, on your favorite podcast platforms, talking through all the top storylines from the CFL each and every week. That does it for your Week 3 CFL Fantasy Recap. As always, thanks for watching. Take care. Have a good one. Bye.